Our program will begin in 1 minute.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jay Herman. I'm the Senior Development Director of APAC in the Northeast region. And on behalf of APAC, I want to welcome you to tonight's program.
I'm Daniel Kraus. I'm Associate Vice President at Birthright Israel Foundation. Thank you, Jay, for having me in your home tonight. So excited.
It's really terrific. And I'm glad we're finally able to do this. I'm glad you're in my home, but I'm really more importantly appreciative of the fact that Birthright Israel Foundation and APAC are partnering together because the work that both organizations do is really so important. It's so important to me. I know it's so important to you. We all have our wow moments, Daniel. I've recently been thinking about this, how there is a moment in time when we experience something that has forever changed us, especially as it relates to Israel and our commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship, and why are we so passionate. And for me, that experience came in 1995 when I was on the college campus, and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Bill Clinton, who was President of the United States at the time, both took the stage of the APAC Policy Conference. It was an experience like none other. I will never forget it, and I've been involved ever since. And I have to say, had there been a Birthright Israel in 1995, I would have been the first to go. The truth of the matter is, quite frankly, I'd never been to Israel until I started at APAC in 2003. So I was definitely missing out, and I'm really excited about what Birthright has done up until this point.
It was just 4 years later, in 1999, when we began taking individuals to Israel, that your experience has transformed thousands and thousands of lives who've had this transformational 10-day experience that has transformed Birthright Israel from just a program of the Jewish people to a strategic asset for the Jewish future. And tonight's participants are just a snapshot of hundreds and thousands of individuals who've had that experience that has spawned their own desire to be part of strengthening the Jewish Israel future, the Jewish people, the Israel movement. And I'm so excited to hear from all the participants tonight.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to hearing from them. They all have such unique stories to tell. And I also know that we are looking forward to hearing from Yaakov Katz, who's a dear friend of both of us, who's the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, who will share with us the challenges that Israel is facing on the COVID-19 front and what the absence of trips from organizations like Birthright Israel Foundation and AIPAC is having on the larger society and the Jewish state. And I know that today and in the future, what's going on now is definitely having huge ramifications. So looking forward to hearing from him.
And with that, I think let's dive straight into the program. But before we do that, let's make a toast in L'chaim to the ability of two wonderful organizations to bring people back, to strengthen the connection. Thousands of young adults are awaiting the Birthright Israel opportunity to return to the land. Thousands of missions that AIPAC runs, and hundreds of individuals who go through AIPAC from all levels of individuals in Congress, through participants and lay leaders, should be able to touch and feel the beauty of Israel. So to our two organizations, to return people to the land, to the leaders of our two wonderful organizations, to continue to have the strength and the ability to lead our efforts in doing what we do, and to tonight's program, wish everyone to grab a good drink, to say l'chaim, and to toast to a strong future, and may we be back in the land of Israel in a short while. Thank you.
Amen.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. Enjoy tonight's show.
Hi, I'm Jackie Soleimani, and when I was 18, I went to Israel for the first time, and it changed my life. I remember meeting Israeli peers of mine and just being amazed that they were serving their country, and it motivated me that when I got back to my college campus, I needed to find a way to give back to Israel, and that's how I discovered AIPAC. I had an incredible experience as a college student and took advantage of all the incredible conferences and trainings and trips that AIPAC offered, and even went on to become Activist of the Year at Policy Conference. And it was that motivated me to work as part of the AIPAC staff in New York. And as a fundraiser in Manhattan, I found so many of the people that proactively wanted to get involved in AIPAC were Birthright Israel alumni or parents of Birthright Israel alumni. And it really was an amazing thing to see that something pretty special was happening here. And I took the next step in my career as a staff member of Birthright Israel Foundation. And I remember the first time I went to Israel as a member of Birthright staff, I was at a mega event, and there were thousands of young Jewish adults from around the world, and the energy of the room and the feeling of so many people proud of being Jewish, proud of being in Israel, and for many, their first time having such an opportunity. I knew that Birthright is doing something incredible, and it is so much more than a 10-day trip. It's changing the future of the Jewish people. And every time I'm in Israel, or even a lot of the times in the States, people are constantly thanking me, saying, Birthright changed my life. I met my spouse, I met my boss. And it's a gift, not just for them, it's a gift for the Jewish people. Because what's amazing, if you look at my story, you look at others, Birthright and AIPAC are giving to each other. And it's this unbelievable care for the Jewish people and for Israel that is enabling people to not only seek out these organizations as where to get involved, but that we're able to help each other only grow and be stronger. So of the many 750,000 people that have gone on a Birthright Israel trip that are involved in AIPAC or other Jewish organizations, thank you. And thank you, AIPAC and Birthright Israel Foundation, for making it all possible.
Hi, this is Michelle Tandler, and I'm dialing in from San Francisco, California. I'm really excited to be on this call today because I feel pretty deeply that the beginning of my journey as a Jewish adult really began with Birthright. I signed up as a freshman in college and went after my freshman year, and actually came back to school sophomore year and felt this sort of longing in my heart to return to Israel. I ended up taking a leave of absence and studying abroad at Hebrew University my sophomore year. While I was there in Israel studying abroad, and I had an amazing experience, studied Israeli history and politics and did Ulpan, studied Hebrew, I actually decided to transfer. And so the summer before I transferred to University of Pennsylvania, was put in touch with the head of the AIPAC Campus Advocates group on campus. And, I was pretty nervous to be transferring. I was going to be coming in as a junior, but that group really welcomed me with open arms and gave me a leadership role on campus and got me engaged right away. And that group was sort of my first set of friends. I would say coming to school and being involved with APAC, I sort of had an entryway into the further Jewish campus life. I got involved with Hillel. I started attending APAC Policy Conference. I made a ton of Jewish friends on campus and was able then to take that passion and newfound appreciation for that community with me when I moved to New York. I went to New York the summer before I graduated, and then again after graduation, and started volunteering at APAC events, continued going to APAC Policy Conference, maintaining friendships, reconnecting even with old friends from WashU. And the APAC Policy Conference became this really important and special annual trip. I did it every year with my dad. He would fly out from San Francisco. I would take the train down from New York. And it would just be an incredible way to reconnect with that community. Fast forward to my 20s, I ended up moving back to San Francisco, and of course, right away got involved with both Birthright Leadership Council and APAC alongside my family. They had been engaged for many years with those two communities, and it became an incredible way for me to sort of do something special with my parents, especially my dad, and we'd attend events and go to policy conference and talk about what's going on in Israel. And I found the organization, actually both of the organizations, to be a great way for me to connect with my Jewish roots, but also broader community and people who are really passionate about Israel. So this is all to say, it's actually unbelievable to me that the two organizations are separate. In my mind, they're so connected. They're about being a strong advocate and friend and ally to Israel, connecting people in the community to things that they care about. And I just feel so grateful for both of them and excited to continue my involvement. It's been really amazing as I go into my 30s here to think about how I can continue to get engaged with these two organizations going forward. I've also been doing a lot of soul searching recently on how I can reconnect with the more religious side of Judaism, especially as we're in a pandemic and there's so much sadness around us. I was planning to go to Israel actually in March and had to cancel my trip because of COVID. But I sort of can't wait to be able to rebook that flight. And it's something that I hold out in my mind as something that I'm really looking forward to. In the meantime, I'm looking for more ways to get engaged here on the ground in San Francisco. It's been incredible working with PJ Charon, who's our liaison out here for the Birthright organization. And getting more connected to my Jewish roots is something that I feel, again, it's time to reinvest. So I was really excited that the organizations reached out and had me record this video. It's been a reminder of some of the things that I really care about. And I hope that everyone who's on this call is also finding new ways to reconnect with their roots. Thanks so much.
How can I even begin to thank you for the gift you gave me?
There are so many memories and moments from my trip.
I don't think I'll have the time to say them all.
But I'll never forget stepping off the plane at Ben Gurion.
And finally,
feeling like I was home. When we boarded the bus, I realized I found my people, my community.
I knew this trip was one for the books from the moment it began.
Being in Jerusalem, I got to touch the kotel for the first time.
It is something I will never forget. Just like the feeling of the stones and placing my note in the wall.
And the friendships I made with my group and the Israelis that joined us.
I never imagined we'd have so much in common.
We may be from different countries,
but we are all the same.
But we are all the same.
I knew this trip was life-changing when we went to Masada.
It was there where I realized how lucky we are to be Jewish.
I learned our people made the ultimate sacrifice.
And for the first time in my life,
I felt proud to be Jewish.
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 I'll never forget all of the bus rides either.
This is where my group became a family.
Where we challenged each other's beliefs.
And we reflected on all we had learned each day.
But no matter what topic we were discussing or what our background was,
it didn't matter. Because we were all Jewish.
Because we were all Jewish.
We were all Jewish.
Because we were all Jewish.
Because we were all Jewish. My Birthright Israel trip is something that will stick with me forever.
The memories I made will be with me under the chuppah.
It will be with me when I light candles on Friday night.
When I spin the dreidel with my children.
When I speak up for Israel.
And each day when I wake up, I'm proud of who I am, a Jew.
I know it all stems from this gift.
The gift of Birthright Israel.
And that is all thanks to you. Your generosity and continued support have impacted an entire generation. On behalf of myself and all of Birthright Israel alumni, thank you.
When I was 19, a friend said, "Hey, do you want to do Birthright?" I said, "What's Birthright?" She said, "A free trip to Israel." And all I heard was free trip to the Middle East. And I planned 5 weeks in Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, places where I had friends. And then I took this flight and I landed at Ben Gurion. And with 2 feet firmly planted on Israeli soil, I felt this visceral sense of belonging, as if I were home. And that night they paired us with soldiers. And Efrat, a 21-year-old officer in the intelligence, started talking to me about the guys she was dating and the music she listened to and the best place to get a bacon cheeseburger in Tel Aviv. And I finally stopped her. I said, "What are you talking about?" Because Israel's a place where soldiers bulldoze children, where religious fundamentalists run the government, and where people wander aimlessly in the desert, because those are the images that I had been fed growing up. And she kept using this word Zionism, and I asked her what it meant. And there we were, a 21-year-old Israeli and a 19-year-old American speaking about a movement for and a struggle toward self-determination in our ancestral homeland. And I looked at her and I said, "I think I'm a Zionist." And I spent the next 10 days realizing that I am. Yes, I saw the sunrise over Masada and I heard Hatikva play in a revived spoken language, and I walked toward the light at Yad Vashem. But I also saw so many of my values in action in a living, breathing democracy that I was invited to and wanted to engage with. Social entrepreneurship and biotech and algae and female representation in the judiciary and education and the workforce. And I left and I came back. And I came back to study abroad for a semester, and I came back and brought my mother on her first trip, and I led a birthright journey for young environmentalists, and I stayed involved in those movements, domestic and abroad. And in 2016, I ran for office in my hometown. And Israel, Judaism, it never came up until just before the election. An article read, "Progressive, pro-Israel, and potentially youngest person in Congress." Now, where I come from, pro-Israel is a dirty moniker. And sure enough, within a couple hours, voting for Aaron is like spitting on the grave of a murdered Palestinian child. I knew these people. I was these people. I would be these people if it weren't for the gift of perspective on a 10-day trip. And then from the other extreme, get out of my country, kike. Get back to Israel where you belong. That or the ovens, take your pick. I couldn't stay silent. And so I wrote this piece calling out anti-Semitism for what it is. And I heard from people all across the country, all political backgrounds, saying, "I stand with you." And this organization called AIPAC and their activists had my back in that moment and going forward. And more than anything, what changed in my life in June of 2016 was that I was seen as Jewish for the first time in the eyes of the world. And I very quickly realized that if you won't like me, work with me, or respect me because I'm a Jew, or because I support Israel, those are 2 things upon which I will never waver. And when reminded that this isn't my country, to get out, to choose the existence of Israel as a literal safe haven and refuge had never mattered more, but also as a place that safeguards tradition and values and history, and that relationship between Israel and the US that allow me to live in the diaspora. The future of the Jewish state and the continuity of Jewish people are at a precarious place right now. And I only wish my grandmother, I hope she's looking down on me with pride, because in our family, a connection to Israel skipped a generation. But I can assure you that will not be the case with my children and as many contemporaries as I can. Birthright is that link, that introduction, that cultivation of the bond, the pipeline into better understanding oneself, one's community, but also joining a larger pro-Israel movement, standing with, learning, leading, lobbying with AIPAC. Because I don't live in Israel, I live in the US, and we have work to do at home. Because of Birthright, I know and love the complex, nuanced place that is Israel. And because of AIPAC, I understand how supporting a strong US-Israel relationship translates to a safe, secure nation that can be a light unto the nations, and therein create a better world. I'm a proud activist, a proud member of my generation, a proud American, proud Birthright Israel alum, and a proud vocal supporter of the State of Israel, of the US-Israel relationship, and of AIPAC. Birthright changed my life, fundamentally. And AIPAC was there at one of its hardest moments. And both of them inspire me and hundreds of thousands, millions more to continue on this journey. And I will be here with and for you evermore.
I speak to you now from Jerusalem, where the country is sadly finding itself in the midst of a second and more aggressive wave of the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19. This time of year, walking the streets of Jerusalem is almost like being at a Birthright APAC convention. On the one hand, the buses of Birthright trips fill the streets, and particularly the Old City. That's actually where my in-laws live, and my family and I go there often. We see the groups navigating the narrow alleyways, and some of the people and participants touching the Kotel, the Western Wall, many for the first time. Later in the summer, the country becomes full of additional buses. Freshman congressmen, veteran senators, and other top government officials brought here by AIPAC's education arm to learn about Israel, the challenges it faces, and the threats that still loom on the horizon. As we all know very well by now, this pandemic comes with severe health ramifications. On average, about 1,000 plus Israelis are found to be infected on a daily basis. And the number of people in serious condition is unfortunately on the rise, as all eyes are actually on the fall and winter, when there's concern that COVID mixed with the regular flu could overwhelm our already overwhelmed hospitals. But it's also an economic plague that has put close to 1 million Israelis out of work. One of the industries hit hard by this situation is, of course, travel. El Al, for example, the national airline, has suspended flights until the end of August, and the tourism industry, this time of the year, usually packed with tourists, is completely out of work. Employees from that sector look for new ways to support their families. One friend of mine, who actually is a longtime tour guide of Birthright trips, is studying now to become a teacher. One of the lessons I think we've all learned from this pandemic is that all people are equal. No matter where we come from, no matter what part of the world we're in, we all face the same risks. Yes, it is true that some countries might be doing better than others, but Corona doesn't look at whether you're a head of state, you're wealthy, you're poor, you're Jewish, you're Arab, or your level of observance. I'm sure, like me, many of you were moved by the video of the Arab nurse singing Manishtana, the 4 questions, to patients in a geriatric ward the night of the Passover Seder, or of the Arab doctor cradling a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll, as he carried it into a corona ward for the patients to read from. The way to win, we've all seen, is by working together strategically to stop the spread. It's a classic example, I think, of what our sages said thousands of years ago. Kol Yisrael arevim ze lezeh. All Jews, all Israelis are responsible for one another. It would be difficult for me to think of 2 organizations that better exemplify that saying than Birthright and AIPAC. They both help Israel and the Jewish people on multiple levels. Birthright by strengthening young people's Jewish identity and connection to the state of Israel, and AIPAC by doing the same, but also bolstering the Israel-US alliance. After many years in my career as a journalist, of writing stories and books with a focus on Israel's military and its security, I've come to believe that the existence of the State of Israel rests on 4 key pillars. The first is our conventional military, the IDF, which is really one of the most sophisticated, moral, technologically advanced militaries in the world. The second pillar is our purported nuclear capability. Israel doesn't say it has it, but it doesn't deny that it does it. Everyone thinks we do, and that helps boost deterrence. That lets your enemies know that if your back is up against a wall, you still have this purported capability. The third pillar is our economic trade, our technology, startup nation. We leverage that to bridge and open new lines of communication, diplomatic relations with countries from Asia to Africa to Europe and South America, all across the globe. They want to tap into the Israeli expertise, the know-how, the genius, and the tech that's coming out of this country. And our fourth pillar is the Israel-US alliance, which is so crucial to Israel's survival, the military support it gets from the United States. But it's not just there. It's when Israel knows that it has a friend, no matter who's in the White House, that will stand by it, that allows Israel to take the risks it needs, that allows Israel to act without concern that it will pay a price, whether it's, hopefully it won't happen in the ICC or anywhere else in the world. It has America to rely on. And this is possible because of smart diplomacy, shared values, joint interests, but also because of organizations like AIPAC and Birthright, which instill within people from a young age the understanding that "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, tishkach yemini." If I forget Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. In my office alone, as editor of the Jerusalem Post, we have about a dozen writers and reporters who are graduates of Birthright Tours. They came here. They experienced Israel. They felt something that made them return to this country, and they took up a pen and a notepad to continue to fight through journalism to protect Israel's democratic and Jewish character. When I think about the future of Israel, it's dependent on so much. No matter where we live, no matter what we do, no matter who we are and whatever our background might be, we all play a role in the fight for our state, our people, and our nation. There are those who do that by coming on Birthright, who realize a spark in their hearts and become active members in their communities, tying their destiny to the Jewish nation. There are those who climb the steps to Capitol Hill and lobby their congressmen and senators to ensure that Israel's needs are looked after, no matter who's in power in the White House. And there are people like Max Steinberg, a young man who visited Israel on Birthright and came to live here and to serve in the IDF. And 6 years ago, exactly this time of the year, he died, he was killed in the line of duty while fighting in the Gaza Strip against Hamas in Operation Protective Edge. 30,000 Israelis came out to attend Max's funeral. They didn't do so because they knew him, but they did so because they recognized the sacrifice that this lone soldier had made. They felt a desire to show their appreciation, their compassion, and their solidarity. The story of Israel is the story of an ancient people that returned to its historic homeland and achieved the impossible. We didn't just survive, we persevered and we prospered. With God's help, with your help, that will continue to be the case. Thank you very much.
My name is Alexa Silverman, and I've been the New Jersey director for AIPAC for the past 8 years. When I was in college, my oldest friend asked me if I wanted to go with her during winter break on a free trip to Israel, and we could ride camels and eat falafel. And I jumped at the opportunity to spend time with her to go back to Israel, but I don't think I was prepared for what happened there. Being on a peer group trip to Israel with people of all different backgrounds, experiencing Israel in this setting for the first time is inspiring. And I distinctly remember this moment when we were in Jerusalem and watching my oldest friend understand the history, of the Zionist vision come to life. And I felt that too. I knew from that moment that I wanted to spend the rest of my life surrounded by like-minded people in pro-Israel spaces and making sure that Israel was always there for the Jewish people. And that led to me actually leading 2 additional Birthright trips so I can experience and watch other people have this moment and see it through their eyes again. For years after I led the Birthright trips, I looked for mentors in the pro-Israel activist space. I looked for organizations that aligned with the values that had ignited within me. And when I graduated from law school, one of those mentors told me about a position at AIPAC. And I couldn't believe it had taken me this long to find AIPAC, an organization whose entire mission is to strengthen the bonds between the United States and Israel to make sure that Israel is always safe and secure and has the ability to defend herself by herself. I wake up every day surrounded by the utmost professionals, awe-inspiring lay leaders, and I get to work with them to speak to members of Congress in a bipartisan fashion about this issue that Birthright had ignited in me so many years ago. For me, that feeling that energizes me is the first day of policy conference when 18,000 people stand up and sing Hatikva in our nation's capital. I look forward to it year after year. 2 days later, walking up to Capitol Hill, 18,000 strong, to lobby on legislation that we know will change the course of history, to see my young children come with me after my first trip to Israel with my grandparents so many years ago. My life has come full circle, and I wake up so blessed that all the pieces of my life had led me to this moment in time. It's so impactful to me that the Birthright Israel Foundation and AIPAC work so closely and so hand in hand to make sure that there is always a Jewish state and Jewish continuity. My children, Rafi and Ayla, are going to do it backwards. They've already been to policy conference. I can't wait for their first Birthright trip. Maybe they'll be leading trips too. And these two organizations mean everything to me, and I am a byproduct of their amazing work. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andy Weiss. I'm a commercial mortgage broker in New York City. I'm originally from Irvington, New York. I grew up a proud Jew, but didn't have much of an affiliation with an organized Jewish community growing up. That all changed when I went to college, went to Northeastern University in Boston, and after my freshman year, I would attend my first trip to Israel, my first Birthright trip. I would go on to staff 2 in my 20s, and it was a memorable trip for me. I got inspired, left feeling a deeper passion for Israel and for Israel advocacy. But one memorable, distinct moment that I'd like to recall is an evening, the eve of Yom HaShoah actually. We were in the deserts, we were at a Bedouin tent, and our tour guide took us on an evening hike. We went out, he asked us to lay down and look up at the stars, and he invited us to start counting the stars. And then he said to try and imagine counting 6 million, the message obviously clear, to remember the 6 million and to think about how innumerable the lives lost were. And for me that hit home. My grandmother, as a Holocaust survivor, she fled Vienna, as did much of her family, who thankfully were able to survive. Her father and many others did not have the same fate and unfortunately perished, something I've lived with my entire life. I would go on after Birthright to become a campus leader, being a president of Hillel, AIPAC, very involved with Birthright programming on campus. And my senior year, I would have the opportunity to attend my first ever AIPAC policy conference with the then Birthright coordinator at Northeastern, who would coincidentally go on to become the AIPAC Young Leadership Director, Jason Pressburg, in New York City when I was a young professional. And after college, after my first policy conference trip, I should say, I actually signed up for my second policy conference, and I got my dad to sign up. Long story short, I've been to now 9 AIPAC policy conferences. My dad has been to 8. This last year I had multiple cousins, aunts and uncles attend as well. It's become a family affair for us, and we're very passionate about the cause. Since that first policy conference, I have joined the Young Leadership Council in New York, become involved with the Young Real Estate Council, and very proud to say I'm on AIPAC's National Council, and I help run a political fundraising network for young professionals here in New York City. The work for me is extremely meaningful, and I'd say the biggest impact that I'm able to see is when I go down to Washington and lobby members of Congress on issues that are important to the U.S.-Israel relationship, to Israel, to the Jewish community, and it feels empowering, and it feels ultimately just amazing to be able to do that work. I feel very fortunate, and I'd say one point to highlight would be Carolyn Maloney's recent bill passage on Holocaust education in America. For me, that was meaningful, and even just tying back to my Birthright experience and my grandmother's experience, I think it's important for our country to ensure that the memory of the Holocaust and genocide is never forgotten. And I'm proud to be able to lobby for issues like that and issues that are important to our community. And that's the reason I support AIPAC and Birthright, because they're leading the way for the next generation to be engaged in Jewish life, to be engaged in pro-Israel life, pro-Israel advocacy, and I look forward to helping both organizations continue to do the great work that they do.
Israel faces challenges on each of its borders unlike any other country in the world. We've seen firsthand the importance of U.S. support for Israel's security, the memorandum of understanding that provides $3.8 billion a year for the next 10 years for Israel to have the resources she needs to defend herself by herself.
We heard that from Prime Minister Netanyahu, we heard it from Benny Gantz, we've heard it from everybody across the country. Security will probably forever be the #1 issue here in Israel. And it's my belief that Israel is our one true trusted ally in the region that we can rely on forever.
I'm out here in the Golan Heights. We are here getting a briefing on the Syrian border and to looking at the potential threats that are out there and really how it's changed over the years and how it keeps changing every year. The threat to Israel is always there.
As a freshman member, I think this is probably one of the better opportunities for me to go around and not just see the place, but meet the people. It's really important for us to physically be in a place when we're responsible for making decisions that are so impactful.
One of the most important visits was to see Iron Dome. As a policymaker, we authorized this program. It's saving Israeli lives, and it also has benefits to the U.S. national security priorities around the world.
We've been up on the Golan Heights because you look out over that border, you see and realize how fragile peace is here and how every day the people who live here deal with the fact that today could be the day when the enemy wants to advance across that line, and they're just right there.
We were on the border with Lebanon, where we could see down into a village where a tunnel was found. You could see the site of the tunnel. You could see Hezbollah flags still flying. It really drove home just how close they are and just how omnipresent the threat is to Israel and how important it is to continue to support them back home.
People often think that it's advantageous to Israel to have that U.S.-Israel relationship, and it's our job to bring back to people that it's equally important to the United States as a strategic partner in all areas: security, cybersecurity, economic and trade issues. We have to always be strengthening it, and we all have to be very, very vigilant about protecting that relationship.
When you think about national security challenges around the globe, no one is closer than the U.S. and Israel, and we see that firsthand on this visit.
Hi, I'm Doug Ross. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I currently serve as Atlanta APAC chair. I have been involved with the organization for about 20 years and been an activist for most of those years. I'm also a former member of the APAC National Council. And as far as Birthright Israel Foundation is concerned, I became chair of Birthright Israel Foundation here in Atlanta in 2012 and joined the National Board of Directors of Birthright Israel Foundation in 2015, where I now serve as one of the officers. One of the greatest joys in my life is connecting my friends with something that is going to bring meaning to their lives. And I can't even begin to count how many people who have become involved with APAC or have become involved with Birthright Israel have expressed their profoundest gratitude, sometimes in words, and sometimes just a look on their face, and sometimes literally with tears in their eyes, because everybody on the planet wants to be involved in something that's bigger than themselves. They want to be a part of history. I believe that APAC and Birthright Israel are literally changing the arc of Jewish history. And from a Birthright Israel perspective, for young people who go to Israel for these 10 days and come away so moved, so motivated to learn and to become involved, APAC is a natural progression, a natural next step for them to express how deeply they feel about being Jewish and about supporting Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship. From APAC's standpoint, I'm just thinking of this from the Birthright Israel perspective. APAC is looking at, has an opportunity to connect with tens and tens and tens of thousands of young American Jews every year that are going on Birthright Israel. And this is, as I've said earlier, the most complementary and synergistic relationship between two organizations that I can possibly imagine. And it's a besides being a father and besides being now a grandfather, Being involved with these two organizations is very simply the greatest honor of my life. And if I can help to spread this message in my own way to other people, then I feel that the mission has been accomplished.
I hope you've enjoyed these amazing stories, these inspiring stories, and I hope you have a greater connection to both organizations, Birthright Israel Foundation and AIPAC.
Thank you for joining us this evening. We conclude with the beautiful rendition of Hatikva by a wonderful alumni of Birthright Israel. Hope this is the beginning of a bright future for both organizations together. Have a wonderful week ahead.
Yahudi Homiya Ufate Mizrach Kadima Ein Letzio Sophia Od Lo Avdatik Bateinu Hatikva bat shnot alpayim liotam chofshi me'atzenu eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim liotam chofshi